G'day, wherever you may be in this wonderful multiverse of ours. This is Mastering Music, Mastering Life. Tony, Jack the Bear Mance in the house once again in my studio, Deluxe Master in Melbourne, Australia. And I have a great pleasure today of having a gentleman that I've been wanting to get on the podcast for a very long period of time, but circumstances and things just got in the way. But we finally have arrived at this point, and it's an absolute privilege and honor to introduce Mr. Chris Athens on the podcast. Chris, thank you for joining me.
It's a pleasure. Sorry it took so long.
No, it's all right, man. It's in a way it's kind of good because I don't know whether I've always wanted to be in the Guinness Book of World Records, and I thought what record hasn't been done, and maybe the longest period of time to get someone on a podcast. So I don't know if we haven't established it. Because I've got the emails and the messages to prove the fact that how long it's taken.
I think it's about 2 years. I'm not 100% sure, but it's a while.
Something like that, but anyway, we've arrived and here we are, and it's wonderful to have you on, my friend. Thank you so much.
It's a pleasure.
Now, before we start, one thing I need to say to you, and I'm publicly acknowledging this because I think it's important that it gets acknowledged, and that is through my we'll loosely call it career as a mastering guy. There's three occasions that I can remember very clearly where I was ready to throw the towel in. I just got to a point where I said, I'm done, I've had enough, I'm not good enough, I can't do this thing. And I remember we first spoke many years ago when you were at Sterling, and you didn't know me from a bar of soap, but you were gracious enough we probably maybe spoke 3 or 4 times on the phone. And again, like I said, you didn't know me, but you took the time to talk to me. And I remember I was alluding to what was happening with me, and because I said I wasn't good enough and I didn't have a great talent, and your words are very clear. They still ring in my ears, and which is, hey man, hey dude, hey brother, whatever you said. I'm not a great talent either, but you know what? I just grind longer and harder than anybody else. It's all it is. And that remained with me. And at the time I believed in what you were saying, but the impact of those words, Chris, and I never had the opportunity to thank you for that, because honestly, I was at the precipice of throwing the towel in. This is like 2002 or thereabouts. So I wanted to publicly thank you for that, because it was a pivotal moment in my life.
You're welcome. I mean, it would have been a shame if you had thrown in the towel, my friend.
Yeah, I guess so. But it's funny how as artistic creatives now, self-esteem or lack of seems to be, the biggest pandemic in the world. And as someone that mentors a lot of kids, I see a lot of it. It's the greatest fear, that we're not enough. But the one thing that really impressed me about you is that you always had a certain swagger about you, man. Now, I'm curious to know, where did that come from? Because your swag is not fake. There are guys that can put the bullshit veneer on, but your swag is like, it's real. So where did you develop that sense of self-belief and self-confidence to be you?
Well, I don't know. I suppose early on it was probably a defense mechanism, knowing where my weaknesses were and how little I knew. I probably was overcompensating with, unearned confidence to kind of keep myself going, so I wouldn't give up, because there are a lot of reasons to give up. I mean, I came up in a system. My first legit job in the business was in one of the last union shops in the world at Sony Music, and I had got a late start in life, and I saw a very long, slow road ahead of me, which I was not a big fan of. I wanted it really badly, and there are a lot of people who were in front of me sitting in those rooms, and they weren't going anywhere. So there was a lot of reason to and also I spent a lot of time, I don't want to get ahead of myself, but in the library at Sony, and it was very difficult to make the transition from the library to the technical department and into the mastering rooms and such. And so it was disheartening sometimes, and knowing how little I knew and how long I had to go before I could get experience and be good at it and all that kind of stuff was a struggle. In the meantime, you're trying to pay your bills. And I was already a grown man at that point. I wasn't starting there as a kid.
Yeah, you're 28 or 29, I think?
I was 27 when I got my job in the library.
Yeah.
And I think I was 30, maybe close to 31 when they moved me into the technical department, making tape copies on the night shift.
Glorified tape copy boy.
Totally glorious. I mean, I was thrilled, but it was a long road. I almost quit several times, and I had to kind of like pump myself up. The other thing was that the mentors that I developed during my time in the library, I had the whole thing was kind of precipitated by the fact that I was a decent librarian, and the mastering engineers that I delivered tapes to and the producers that I delivered tapes to in the studios every day were very, very kind and patient with me, and they liked me. So I got to sit in on a lot of stuff. I developed relationships with them. The engineers and to some degree the producers mentored me, and we became friends. And that kind of helped me stick to it. And also I was learning before I got into the technical department. I mean, Vlado Meller taught me how to cut vinyl while I was still a librarian. Mark Wilder was a very good friend of mine. Vic Anasini, Deborah Parkinson, all of these people at Sony kind of took me under their wing, would answer questions. But primarily Mark, Kevin Butot, and Vic Anasini and Vlada. They taught me a lot even before I got my first gig making tape copies. So I, got on a roll there, and that kind of kept me in. But I think, my confidence now is just because, how they say you've 10,000 hours, the cliche is 10,000 hours to become a master at something. I'm on 25.
Yeah.
So not 25 hours, but 25,000.
Yeah. I hear. Well, as I tell kids, I'm nearly 40 years into my apprenticeship, and
exactly.
And as cliche as it is, I think it's true. There's always something new to learn, and one of the great things I get out of mentoring is that I learn a lot from kids. I learn a lot about new ways of working, particularly because I'm not a technical guy at all. I've made it known that I'm I wouldn't say a complete technophobe, but certainly not great when it comes to the technicalities and the minutiae of mastering. But kids today, man, it's extraordinary what you learn from them when you're open enough to listen to what they have to say, because they're living in a different world. They're brought up in a whole different environment, a different culture, a different way of doing things. And so there's always new things to learn, new trick. An old dog can learn new tricks if you're open to it.
It's very true. Also, the old dogs, like the people that, Dave Collins, I know I'm like you. I'm a just kind of mildly creative guy who loves music and got good at something through grinding. And I'm not Dave Collins. I'm not an electrical engineer on top of having great taste and all that kind of stuff. I'm just a guy with an aesthetic, and I know how to do this one particular thing, and that's about it. I mean, if I have questions about technology, I'd call Dave, not me.
Absolutely. No, I completely agree. I think one of the greatest lessons I learned as a kid, I was lucky I got trained in New York, because that's where I learned, that you are a service industry first and foremost. So get the idea that you're an artist out of your head. But Rick Essig at Frankfurt Wayne, who taught me how to cut lacquers, and was gracious enough to give me time, even put me up in his home and treated me like family. And it was something that I attribute to a lot of my success. I attribute to that man. I really do. But I remember, I'm not going to even try and do a Jersey accent because I don't want to insult people from Jersey. But he said to me, 80% of this job is bullshit. And I remember turning around, looking at him, not quite getting what he was saying. He says, "It's bullshit, man. It's hang time. It's relationships. It's clients." He said, "Yeah, you got to be good. You need chops. You need all that. But if people don't like you, they're not going to work with you. And particularly when they're working in a close proximity with you, they better like you, and you better like them. And they better feel and believe that you're invested. You got to be a surrogate member of their band or project." And that remained with me, man. And this is why I said, you can have the greatest ears on the planet and the greatest chops, but I still think that's true now. If we're in the relationship economy, and the currency is trust, and I'm really glad I got that drilled into me from a very, very early age.
Extremely important. I mean, a lot of it is, to some degree, psychology, empathy. You know, if you can relate to someone and put yourself in their shoes, and you're a nice person and you're paying attention, you show up on time and you work hard and you're focused, those people are going to like you. You know, I think one of the biggest things back in the day, especially when we did a lot of attended sessions, and when I first started, it was 90% that, you know, there was a teamwork aspect and a focus aspect, that building rapport with a client is much easier when they feel like you're really digging in. You're a nice person. You're keyed into what they're doing, what they want, and your goals are aligned. You know, you both want to get through it as efficiently and quickly as possible. You want to deliver something great and be as flawless as your work is capable of being. You know, pay attention. Don't be lazy and sloppy. And if you can do that, I mean, the rest is really, I like to think of my funny formula for success, because for whatever reason, I get asked about it quite a bit, but focused attention times time seems to be one of the best, simplest formulas for a career in this business. A lot of people don't like to hear that, though. They want to know, you know, how do you get the bass to sound X, Y, and Z? And I tell them, just do it for 10 or 20 years and you'll know.
Yeah.
Nobody likes that answer.
No, and I think particularly, and this is not me having to go at millennials or Gen Ys or whatever the kids are categorized as these days. They're living in the world where it's a fast world where everything's available on demand, and so there's probably an expectation that if they can get everything happening with a click of a button, then skills should be as easily attainable. And you're right. The one unavoidable aspect of all this is work, time, and rolling up your sleeves. And also this idea of there's no magic formula, Chris. There's no panacea to, you know, here's a preset and this sets you up forever. I think that the only way you get good, like you said, do your 10,000 hours as an arbitrary figure. And learn how to do it wrong as well, because sometimes those so-called mistakes you make may become the genius that you provide, you know, to a record. But
there are a lot of things you can do actually to accelerate your experience and your learning in any business, but in this business, there's lots of things you can do. And I've made a million mistakes. I mean, I've overcompensated for those mistakes through the grind, not to make that sound like I have some sort of heroic work ethic, but I do. And, you know, I've done it for a long time, and I've paid the price for those things. And I've done some things that have been not efficient. I could have done better, but there are always going to be people looking for shortcuts, or there are a lot of people who think, and this always kind of cracks me up, that, you know, people referring to the business still as the dark art, or you know, secrets, you know, demystified and all that kind of stuff. But the truth is, all of that is bullshit. I mean, there are no mysteries, especially now. I tell people who ask me that they can learn, if you know how to engineer, if you know how to mix stuff or record stuff, you can learn probably 90% of the most often used mastering techniques in a couple of hours on YouTube if you're watching the right videos.
Yeah.
The question about developing an aesthetic, developing your ears, and sort of deeply listening into the subtlety of things is different for everybody, to some degree, but there's no shortcut for that in my mind. I mean, it's easy for me to say, as a dude that's been doing this a long time now, I have a particular bias because now I'm a guy who's got 25 years of experience, but I really believe that there's no shortcut. I mean, I was probably okay at it after 5 years, but I did 10 years of work in that first 5 years.
Yeah. And
10 years later, or 5 years later, I was way better at it than I was at 5 years. And you know, I recognized that process. I'm still getting better at it now, I'd like to think. But there's no shortcut for that part, because that's one of the ironies of the business to some degree, because of the constraints of working with stereo mostly and things like that. It is very simple because there's a constraint in what you can do to some extent.
Yeah.
Maybe not subtly, but overtly. And, considering that, it's easy to just kind of move the dial to a certain point where you're like, okay, now I know how to use these tools or these techniques to accomplish a certain thing. And then where do I go? And the next kind of little bit on the next little bit of gas comes from just time.
Yeah, absolutely. Talking about that whole black art myth is something that from me, in my bad old days in gear sluts, it was something that I called out so long ago. And you're absolutely right. It's just a simple, it's a skill. It's a different, like mixing. And I've always believed that mixing engineers are the heroes of our industry. And there's a reason why, someone like a Chris Lord-Alge can get 10 grand or whatever. I don't know what his rate is now, but I know there was a time where 10 grand would have been a piece of cake for him. And why in the good days, I don't know, would 500 a track, 1,000 track be reasonable for an engineer in the heyday? Whatever. But nonetheless, there's a disparity. And it's not so much a disparity, but I think it's just putting things in perspective. Because mix engineers, I tell kids, on one channel, we've got 8, decision of, is it dry, is it wet? Do we compress pre-EQ, post-EQ? Then there's panning decisions, level decisions, and that, there's the trim. And that's just on one track, and then you multiply that out, and all of a sudden you've got all these decisions that you have to make, which exponentially can create your head to explode. Whereas in our world, left channel, right channel, we're at the mercy of what we got for the most part. And so what's so hard about that? But my theory is this, Chris, mastering even to this day, even with the internet and forums and whatever, it still doesn't have the same prestige and profile as mixing, as being someone like a Chris Lord-Alge or a Rick Rubin, which are household names. And even Bob Ludwig, probably, I think anyways, probably the top of the heap. And he's probably not a household name as much as those guys. So kids growing up and going to school, they buy records, they see things online, they say, I want to be like him, I want to be like her, and away they go. So it's it seems to be still an overlooked thing.
Some of that is also marketing and the kind of forces of advertising and such, because there are organizations and people who benefit from teaching people, and one of the ways that they do that is by making implied or overt promises about what can happen to your career when they teach you. Like if you go to a school, for instance, that teaches engineering and mixing, the implication is that there's a job waiting for you and you're going to be a superstar, and pretty soon you'll be charging $5,000 a mix. And of course, they don't come out and say that, but there's it's the same thing with software and even hardware manufacturers, where if you buy this box or if you buy this software, X, Y, and Z people use it too, and this will be the way you get over the top if you just have this piece of gear. Mm-hmm. And of course, none of that is true. And it's not true of the schools either, although schools are great. The thing about schools is they've, to some degree, schools and now online have replaced, to some degree, the fine art of apprenticeship over the years, because all the big shops, the big studios have closed, and they don't have, the little ones don't have as much of a standard and money and business to have multiple mix assistants and a huge technical department. And so there, in other words, there's fewer and fewer real jobs in the business that you can get that are ground floor jobs, where if you're a kid off the streets who just loves music and wants to do this, the time was, you became a T-boy, or you were the guy who was a runner for food, and you hung out and you kept your mouth shut and, showed interest, and you slowly moved up the ladder, and you You worked under people and they taught you, and maybe you got good at stuff and they started to trust you. And then one day the main guy gets sick and they ask you to sit down in the chair and run a session, and it goes great. The next thing you know, you're rich and famous. But now that's kind of the job of the school. The problem is they're selling what they want to sell you. Their interest in you is up front in terms of the economics of being a student. And, I never went to Full Sail or any place like that, but I'm sure there's a tremendous amount of learning that happens there. And there are some very famous engineers that have come out of there. But to some degree, they're also selling the dream. So you still have to be the grinder who's willing to do anything. One of the things I used to get classrooms full of kids coming to Sterling every now and then and come through touring the studios, and we'd sit and talk for a while and stuff. It was a pretty commonplace thing. And it would always be a funny moment when somebody would ask me questions like, how do you get to where you are? Or, how do you succeed in the business kind of thing? And they'd always be horrified when I'd tell them that their options are, you can go to school and you can start at the bottom. You can work your way up, or you can go to school, get a degree, and then start at the bottom and work your way up. And they'd always be kind of like, what? Like, you still got to start at the bottom? Yeah, pretty much. And that can be a difficult pill to swallow. If you're an ambitious person with talent and grind and you go to school, great. I mean, that's got to be a head start. But it's not a replacement for luck, hard work, being in the right place at the right time and time.
So tell us, when you started Sterling, Chris, who were your main mentors there? Or who did you predominantly learn most from in your
Sony? Sterling was a very different environment from Sony, not just in that it wasn't a union shop. Sony, there was we were kind of almost all in it together there. There weren't, other than me, there weren't a lot of super ambitious people there. They were happy to do they were kind of lunch pail engineers, some of them fabulously talented, but they showed up, they did their job, they went home, they had families. I mean, the way I kind of got started was not just working on the night shift doing tape copy, but I was friendly with a lot of the mix room assistants. And, they would have projects that they worked on that they wanted to do. And the guys with real talent and experience wanted to go home to their families. I mean, they weren't interested in doing a project in the middle of the night for no money. So they would call me and say, would you master this thing? And I'd say, yeah. Like, I don't need money and I'll do it at 3 a.m. Like that didn't bother me at all. So I got a lot of those gigs, and some of them turned into other things. So that the mentorship at Sony was kind of a tight knit thing. I was friends with all those guys. When I got to Sterling, Sterling was more like a large law firm. The guys were very highly competitive. And most of that came down to billable hours. Like, you were king shit if you made the most money.
Right.
So there wasn't a lot of sharing, even with the people I liked. It was much more subtle. At Sony, I'd be with Mark Wilder and he would challenge me on stuff and literally show me things. At Sterling, it was a lot more subtle. Like, I went there ostensibly to be Tom Coyne's assistant. He was at the time the busiest mastering engineer in the world, even busier than Ted and busier than Bob Ludwig. He was going through this jive phase where he was doing Britney and Backstreet Boys and Wu-Tang and all this other stuff. And he was crazy busy. And they needed an experienced person to be his assistant, like the test when they first interviewed me for the job, because I was already mastering stuff at Sony. And but I wanted to work at Sterling, and so I went over there for an interview. And Tom said to me, "Have you ever done an attended session for hip hop?" And I said, "Yeah, sure, plenty of them." And he said, "How many people attended?" And I sort of slightly sarcastically remarked, "But usually between 2 and 15." And he laughed and immediately knew that I had done attended sessions with hip hop artists, like he was like, "Okay, fine." And that's how I got my shot. And they made me his assistant. And I realized a few things when I first started working there. I thought I was already the hardest working guy in the business. And what I discovered was that I wasn't even the hardest working guy at Sterling. Those guys were all way faster, way more efficient, and harder working than I was. And but just very much like at Sony, part of the reason for my ambition was this sort of intense feeling that I had started so late I needed to catch up.
Right.
And that's why I ended up working harder than everybody else, because I needed it. And when I got to Sterling, they were already had plans in place for the new Sterling. This was up in 57th Street.
Yep.
The new building was in the meatpacking, and they were going to build out these rooms. And there were only so many rooms, and most of them were spoken for.
Yeah.
But there was 2 rooms, I think, that were up for grabs. And I knew from the time I started at Sterling that the clock was ticking, that if I could prove myself there, maybe they'd let me be a guy with his own room. And because I didn't want to be an assistant for that long, and I didn't last as an assistant very long. Tom and Murat fired me as Tom's assistant, and then hired me as a mastering engineer to work around his schedule in his room. And I did that for about a year until they must have decided at some point, okay, we're going to give Athens one of the rooms downtown. But mentorship, when I looked, I had a love-hate relationship with Tom, primarily because we were so close. We worked together all the time. I think he wouldn't say it that often, but I know he respected my work. And he came to rely on me a little bit towards the end, because he would work so much. He'd come in at the end of the day. He would start at 7 a.m. and he'd come into my room at the end of the day and say, "Can you come listen to this for a minute?" And I'd go in his room and listen to what he was doing, and I'd be like, "Yeah, it sounds great. Why?" And he's like, "Ah, man, I can't hear anything anymore." Like it was that level of trust.
Yeah.
And but we had a very contentious kind of relationship, and it wasn't until years later, after he passed, like being here by myself, I realized how much his example affected me. Not just the things he did, like technically, but how he worked. And I find myself saying a lot of the things he said and doing things to some degree, kind of like how he did them. There's a lot of similarities. And so I know that he mentored me kind of unintentionally,
Mm-hmm.
And I got a little of that from all the guys because I was with them for so long. It was almost 13 years.
Yeah.
But I mean, mostly my conversations with George Marino were about toy trains and shotguns.
Yeah. Yeah.
And every once in a blue moon, he would crack an egg of knowledge and just blow my mind. But he was a very kind of internal, shy guy, and he didn't talk much. And he was more about working. I mean, I'm pretty sure he didn't even go to the bathroom. Yeah. He worked for all the time. Yeah. He was the hardest working guy and the nicest guy.
Oh, look, I remember you told me that his nickname there was the Pope.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Never had a bad word to say about anybody. I was a trash talker to an embarrassing level. Not the worst, but up there.
Yeah.
But George, in the 13 years that I knew him, never had an unkind word to say about anybody.
Yeah, that's very admirable.
It just wasn't his thing.
Yeah.
So, we all loved him, and yeah, he was the Pope of mastering. He was also an incredible talent.
Oh, absolutely.
But I learned a little bit from Ted, who I have a great admiration for, and Greg has great taste and stuff, and way too much gear. But he's a good man.
No, that he is. Obviously, I have nowhere near the time spent that you did with George and Tom. Rest in peace, both of them. But I did have a pivotal moment with Tom Coyne, where I told him about my lack of technical ability, and he turned around and said, "What are you even talking about?" I said, "I'm not technical, man. I'm not technical." And I thought that was to my detriment. And he said to me, "Listen, you come from the school of I close my eyes and twist the knobs until it sounds good. And that's it. That's all you need." And again, now he was kind of half serious and joking in again, Tom's, incomparable way. But again, as a young, impressionable fellow, those words stuck with me and remained on. And I took it on board. I thought, well, Tom Coyne told me. So that's right. That's the school I'm from.
It's true. It's true, too. Tom was not very technical. And I say that not to disparage him. He was a feel guy.
Yeah. Yeah.
He didn't care about any of that stuff. And he was very, kind of loose and free with how he did things.
Yeah.
In terms of like he, aggressively EQ stuff and not leave it aggressively, but like his, it wasn't subtle. He was a big move guy,
Yeah.
And I learned a lot from him with that because I came, my tradition at Sony when I came up was, it was all about subtlety and carefulness, because we did so much reissue work. That's really where I started and learned. And a lot of that is like respect for the original, maybe minor improvements, getting the greatest tape transfer you can and subtle. But, you don't want to make something vastly different from the original intent. You want minor improvements. And I came from that kind of careful approach to mastering. And then when I got to Sterling, because there was no reissue happening there, it was all like top of the line new stuff going out on the radio, and guys like Tom were just creatively blowing things up.
Yeah.
And I learned a lot from that. But yeah, he meant it. He wasn't a technical guy.
And I appreciated that honesty that he would say, even though he was cantankerous in his ways at times. I always knew that I'm not that I have a doubt he liked me, but when you're young and you're impressionable and you want people to like you, particularly people that you looked up to and admired and respected. I think when I got a message to a mutual friend, he said, "Tell Tony to go eat shit and die." That's when I thought, okay, he likes me. He really likes me. Got my Sally Field on.
Actually, that's a good example of him liking people. I used to go up to when he was in session. A lot of times what he would like to do is he'd set up an EQ on a song and he'd get the client to approve it by playing it loud and leaving the room for 5 minutes and then watching TV in his client lounge while he was doing that. And I used to walk by the window of his client lounge all the time and just do this up against the window until he saw me pretty much 4 or 5 times a day. But yeah, showing love.
Yeah, absolutely. So you left Sterling. So tell us about what was going on at the time and what prompted the move and why Austin. What took you out there?
Well, I had put in my 25 years during those 13 years at Sterling, and to be honest, I felt like I had Stockholm syndrome. I mean, I worked so hard at that place. And some of this is my fault. I mean, this is one of the mistakes I made coming up is that in my sort of general even-keeled panic to claw my way to the top, I overdid it. I burned the candle at both ends really hard. and in the middle. And it wasn't unusual for me to sleep on the couch in my lounge 3 nights a week. I was there till 3 or 4 every night, and back relatively early the next day. And I didn't eat well. I was killing my sleep cycles, killing my health for a long time. It eventually had an effect, but through one of the things that happened was toward the end of that 13-year run, the combination of sort of being sick of being around those guys. They're all great. I'm not sick of them now. Yeah. I miss them.
Yeah.
But at the time, I was sick of them. It was more than a decade of this every fucking day, and it was mostly about me working way too hard and not taking care of myself. And then a few other things happened. I had some health issues. I got like Lyme disease. I was super burnt out, super fat, and just unhealthy. And I met my wife, fell in love with her, and then my attention got diverted because she's a filmmaker. And I decided I wanted to be the post-production sound guy on her film. So that was a very exciting project that I had to learn how to do post-production for film, post-production and mixing and deliverables and sound design for film, including software and all that kind of stuff. It was all brand new to me. But she was working on her first full-length, small budget, independent film. They didn't have any money, so, I got the gig, which is how I got the girl. But it was all worth it.
Yeah.
But I was distracted, fell in love. We had a kid, we got married. And she's from Texas, so I fell in love with a girl from Texas. And I had always liked Austin from going to South by Southwest and stuff. And what had happened was the rooms of my fancy 1-bedroom apartment in Chelsea, the walls were closing in. We had a baby and a dog, and things were just New York City suddenly felt loud and dirty. And we started thinking about the next step, like, what are we going to do if we want to have another kid and all that kind of stuff. And I was coming toward the end of my contract at Sterling, and I was tired of being there. So I thought, well, I could go out on my own and build a studio in Austin and hang a shingle. And if things don't work out, I could maybe teach at a community college or something like that. We'll work it out. So my wife and I decided to have another kid and move to Austin and, be closer to her family. So that's what we did. We moved here, and I came down here in the middle of a Rick Ross record. I mean, it was right up to the hilt with this stuff. And I was busy right up until the end, and I left, and I've never not been busy. I mean, it took a little. Here's another mistake I made. I'm a terrible marketer, and terrible terrible. I came down here. I didn't even tell my clients that I left. I didn't do an email blast, nothing. Just the receptionist at Sterling was like, he doesn't work here anymore. And a lot of them found me. So I had about, I think, 3 or 4 months that were not slow by normal standards, but slow for me. Mm-hmm. And ever since then, it's been better. I've been busier than ever. I get busier every year, knock wood.
You seem to be single-handedly upholding the economy of Texas, mate.
The economy of Texas is doing very well, thank you, without me. But I stay super busy. I mean, I'm very fortunate. I've taken a lot of chances over the years. One of them was coming here, leaving the best job in mastering, which is being a senior mastering engineer at Sterling, and going out on my own and taking that chance. That's just one example of many risks I've taken with my career over the years that have thankfully played out well for me. And one of the other more subtle things I have done in my business is that I try to do only what I'm good at. And I'm not super organized. I could be way more organized. And, I'm not a good promoter and things like that. I'm also not a good negotiator. I'm kind of naturally uncomfortable talking about money especially with clients that I've had for a long time, people I like, who I considered friends. So I avoid all of that. I don't do a lot of production work because I have basically 3 assistants, and between them and we get everything done very efficiently, and my time is very efficient. So when I say do 8 or 11 singles in a day and 3 to 5 albums a week and several EPs and all that, none of that would be possible. I mean, I'd be dead by now if I was doing it all myself, because I don't want to sit in my chair 20 hours a day like I used to.
Yeah.
I almost killed myself doing that, and I'm not that interested in it. So
would you say would you say, sorry to cut in, but just on that point,
no.
would you say that these days your role primarily is the processing? So your assistants are the guys who load things in the system, get your board just leveled off and ready at 0, ready to go. So you just come in, set tythings up, and then you allow them to print them off and then do all the detailing and that. So you're primarily basically you're just there doing the processing, and
I'm the human loudness button.
Yeah, that's it.
I decide what it sounds like. That's it.
Yeah.
I mean, there are times, obviously, I'll edit something or top and tail something, even produce the parts and send them out when I have to, because we're a fast turnaround place, which I think has been instrumental in my success as well. Mm-hmm. But if you can work quickly and efficiently and people love the sound of your records, you're going to be just fine in this business. Yeah,
absolutely.
So, batting average is everything.
No, for sure. So obviously at Sterling, working under Tom, with Tom, you're synonymous with hip hop. Yeah. So I think if we're looking on the world stage in terms of, and I guess in America particularly, where the market is big enough where not that you set out perhaps to form a niche for yourself, but just market forces. If you have a hit record with something, all of a sudden you become the guy for that genre. And Ted Jensen, for example, with the heavy rock. Now, I know that you can do more than just hip hop, and I know that Ted's not just a one-trick pony. But do you think that there's enough to ride that wave forever? I mean, do you still get any jazz records or rock records, or is it still?
I do. I find that a lot of the records that I get that are not in the urban music genre tend to be indie records. That's not always the case. I mean, Blink 182 and, bands.
Chuck Berry.
Like there's some pretty big bands that I do that are famous. But, I think I have a #1 record on I don't think it's the metal chart. It might be a heavy rock chart or some chart in England with, I forget the name of Bring Me the Horizon. But, I do a lot of alternative music from other countries. Some of that doesn't really make an enormous splash here. So I do non-urban music almost every day, I'd say. But it's definitely a fact that my highest charting stuff most consistently is urban music. And I know exactly how it happened, ironically. Mm-hmm. And I did not intentionally set out to do it. It was very literally started with one client, one record, and me saying yes one time. Yeah. By the way, saying yes to anybody starting out in this business every time, no matter what, to anything is probably a pretty good idea.
Yeah.
But I was working very briefly as Vlado Meller's assistant back at Sony. And he was really the only frontline guy that they had at the time. He was doing all the new release stuff. Everybody else was doing almost 100% reissues. And so Vlado was cutting vinyl. He taught me how to cut. And he was doing all this new stuff. And some of it was very big, Red Hot Chili Peppers to Julio Iglesias, who was enormous at the time.
Yeah.
And everything in between. And he was doing these singles for a hip hop label out of New York called Raucous. And they were a very small label. So small that the president used to show up with the tape under his hand. Mm-hmm. The guy who started the label. And one day he had done, I don't know how many, not much, but he said to me, "You want him, kid?" They didn't have enough money for him. They had tight budgets. It was just singles. He couldn't be bothered. And of course, I said, yeah. So he said, okay. And he introduced me to them. And for, 6 months or so, the head of the company would show up with a reel-to-reel tape of a single. And I did a lot of interesting stuff for them, singles for very early singles for Eminem and, a bunch of other famous hip hop artists. And then what happened was they started to get a little traction and a little money, and they did their first artist albums with me. And two of those were compilations that were very well received in the independent hip hop community. And one of them was an album called Black Star with Mos Def and Talib Kweli, mm-hmm. which went on to become a classic kind of New York backpack hip hop, kind of defined the genre. And we were all young. I mean, me not as much as these guys because I got my late start, but they were young and I was inexperienced. But, the Raucous suddenly went from being like this nobody label to having a lot of success. They got a deal with a major and they got more money and they got more attention. And then from then I was getting calls from all over the world, oh, you did so-and-so's record, Pharoah Monch's record and all this stuff. And it just, people from Japan were calling me and Germany and Italy and lots of international work, lots of local backpack hip hop stuff. And it was primarily that while I was at Sony. And then when I went to Sterling, the woman who booked Tom and I became very close because she was also booking me. And I had developed a lot of trust with her. And really, Tom was so busy, he didn't want to deal with certain clients. So he would have me do the records. And that's how I was introduced to Puffy and how I was introduced to the Wu-Tang.
Right.
With Puffy, it was kind of an accident because I did this Biggie song. And then they came in to work on the record, and Tom, to his credit, I was in the room with Tom and the people from Puffy's label, Bad Boy, and they happened to mention that they wanted to do this album with him because they loved the way the last single sound. And Tom turned to me and said, "I didn't do that. He did." And so the guys from Daddy's House, it was funny because they stopped me in the hallway about 2 hours later and they're like, "Yeah, man, we're leaving. Can you just make sure the shit sounds good?" And I was like, "Tom's doing your record. Like, it's going to sound great, man. But yeah, I'll make sure it sounds good." But after that, I did everything that Bad Boy put out for 8 years. And at the same time, Tom got really tired of working with the Wu-Tang because they were kind of
high maintenance.
They were they were sort of, I liked them, but they were a difficult group of clients. Like they made a lot of noise. They brought a lot of people. They were very disruptive. It was long nights. So one day he just said to me, I don't want to do this anymore. You want to work with him? And I said, yeah. And so he literally gave me that client. So I've done albums for most of the Wu-Tang guys too. And that just at that point I was doing major label hip hop stuff. And then I just got lucky. Like when every part of it was being in the right place at the right time, being in New York, being at Sterling, having a few of these credits. But like when the Atlanta scene blew up, I got a bunch of that early stuff and got a reputation there. When the St. Louis scene blew up, that happened there. Not so much California, but Texas, chopped and screwed kind of stuff. I mean, I just benefited from all of this kind of snowballing effect. And the next thing you know, I'm the hip hop guy in New York. It wasn't the only one, but probably one of the busier ones. Yeah, that's how it happened, man. Yeah. Miami, DJ Khaled and Rick Ross and
and the old Dirty South sound and whatnot.
Yeah, all of that. I was in the right place at the right time. The major labels would send me stuff, or at one point, just as one, for instance, DJ Khaled, when I first met him, he was the president of Def Jam South, and he was primarily an A&R guy. Mm. He was always doing his music thing on the side, but he was an A&R guy. And he brought me Young Jeezy and all this stuff that was from Def Jam South. And we developed a rapport. And when he became an artist, I started doing all of his records. And of course, he was instrumental in bringing me Rick Ross. And I did, at this point, most of Rick's records, especially the early ones, I did them all. Mm. So it just, some of it was luck, but a lot of it was being in the right place at the right time. But it all started with Raucous Records and saying yes when Vlado offered to give me the client.
Mm. The one great bit of advice I got from Vlado was let the song speak to you. Because I asked him, what do you do, man? Like I was asking, what? He said, just let the song speak to you.
Ironically, Vlado was another feel guy. Not very. He knew Vlado he still is, but at the time he was in the business for a very long time. He had started as a young man. I'm not sure if it was his first job, but it was close when he escaped like a communist part of Russia, not Russia.
Czechoslovakia.
I think it was Czechoslovakia.
Yeah.
He escaped. He went to New York. He got the gig, and I think one of his first gigs was at Sony. So he really grew up there, and I used to tell people, because there's people over the years who have criticized him for certain things, and my thing about Vlado is he's forgotten more about mastering than most people know. Most people who do this for a living know.
Yeah,
but yeah, also very much a feel guy, very brash. Talk about confidence.
Oh yeah,
he'd fight with his clients.
No, he was good. Gave me the time of day, as I said, and just never forgot that. Just let the song speak to you was the great advice I got from Vlado. But you were talking before about, he gets criticized for whatever. My take on haters is haters are nothing more, well, for the most part, confused admirers. So, it's all good to show, it's all good to throw insults in the cheap seats, man. But unless you got something to put up to compare and show, and shut your cake hole.
That's the thing that was the thing that killed me about like the couple of years people were hammering Ted Jensen for the distorted, what was the name of that record?
Sun Anger.
Yeah.
Audio.
How that sounded, which like, I get it. There are people who are huge nerdy fans of that band, specifically. And of course that was back when the internet forums were first a big thing, and how everybody acts on the internet. Mm-hmm. But I have firsthand knowledge about the sound of that record. And Ted brought me into his room. Ted was also a guy who didn't talk a lot. And do stuff. So when he spoke, it was like kind of a big deal. And one day I was hanging out in the kitchen at Sterling, and Ted comes out and he looks at me and he goes, "You want to hear something?" And of course I was like, "Yeah, whatever it is, I want to hear it." And I went into his room and he goes, "Sit down." And I sat, and he played this instrumental piece of music to me. And I was listening to it. I mean, it didn't sound bad, but it was obviously super hot and distorted. And in fact, the meter was the triangle of death. And I was like, "Whoa, what the hell is that?" And he said, "That's the unmastered version of this song, and it's Metallica." And I just laughed at him and I said, "Dude, you know you're fucked, right?" And he's like, "Yeah." But here's the thing about being a professional mastering engineer. I mean, he could have told the guys to fuck off. This sounds like shit. I don't want my name associated with. That's not what we do. What we do is, whether or not it's our personal aesthetic, is to help the band achieve their personal aesthetic. And that's what he did. I mean, he did. And the other thing is that Lars and all those other guys are very experienced musicians, producers, artists, who, by the way, showed up to the sessions many times. They were there, they listened to it, they approved it. Nobody rammed it through the system. This wasn't like the A&R guy decided this is what they wanted. Evil Ted was blowing up their thing to win the loudness war, and that was that. This was the band's idea. It was the band's idea of good. It was the band's idea of, this is what we want. It was that way to some degree from the beginning, obviously, them and the producer mixer who did it. And I don't have a problem with any of that. If that's your artistic vision, I mean, that's great. Sometimes you're going to ruffle a few feathers if you're doing something a little bit on the edge. And Ted took a lot of heat for that, but he deserved none of it. I mean, he did a good job, and he did what he was asked to do.
Yeah. I think that's the other thing, that people just aren't privy to the machinations going on behind the scenes when it comes to making records, or who makes the decisions, or whether it's a combination, or politics, or what have you. And we got a lot of angry lynch mobs, like you said, just quick to jump and pounce on people based on the way the external world has to reflect back to them. And if it doesn't, then that's where stress and tension comes in, and the vitriol and whatnot. But, it's I again, at the time, when it all went down, I had nothing to say about it, because what could I say? I mean, I had nothing to contribute. I didn't really have much thought about it, other than I just don't know. I can't make commentary on something I'm not privy to. I have no background information on, or context around. So, but this whole, I'm not going to talk about loudness.
I think my point,
make your point.
I got on that tangent a little bit because you were asking about Vlado, and one of the things he was criticized for similarly was a Red Hot Chili Peppers record that he did that was very loud and a little crunchy. Mm-hmm. And he got, a little bit of a reputation for it, but that was all Rick Rubin. I mean, for better or for worse, Rubin is a great producer. If he wants the thing hot and slammed and that's how he's hearing it, who is Vlado to tell him any different? And I feel that way about my clients. I mean, I prefer if they let me have a say and keep things kind of within the bounds of reason. But if somebody wants to do something crazy, I'm going to kind of help them best I can.
Yeah. I think Vlado copped a bit of flack on Audio Slave as well.
Yeah.
But here's the rub, Chris. At the end of the day, he got his name on those records. They sold truckloads of copies. His walls are adorned with gold and platinum plaques, and he kept being busy. So, money talks and bullshit walks at the end of the day,
That's true. That's true. Haters gonna hate.
Yeah, indeed. So now, one thing I remember in your career earlier on, this is something that was, I thought, fairly progressive and new. I mean, now we're seeing we're seeing more integration of mixing and mastering, particularly with stem mastering. But I remember years ago when you were at Sterling, where you were actually doing a little bit of, on your mastering jobs, a little bit of post-production mixing, and I don't know whether it was stem mastering or such, but I do remember you dabbling in that field. So what brought that? Was that just something because you were being experimental, or was it asked of you, or did you feel it would have been a good idea? How did you come to starting to dabble and create a bit more of a hybrid situation?
Don't tell anybody, but
I won't, promise.
Don't tell anybody. I am a pioneer of stem mastering. Definitely, that's a big. So what happened was, I mean, the film guys got to it before me. That's where I took the idea from. But what happened with nobody I know of was doing stem mastering, especially not in the analog domain when I started doing it. But one of the great things about being at Sterling was I worked very closely with a audio genius named Chris Muth.
Oh, yeah.
And he was running the technical department there. And one day I was dreaming out loud about what I would like to do, because some of my independent clients, to be honest, were having problems with their mixes. This was sort of the dawn of the democratization of people mixing their own stuff and things like that. And I was still at a point where I got a fair amount of indie stuff, and sometimes it was very problematic. And there were certain things I felt like I could fix, because having been a mix engineer before I became a mastering engineer, which grew out of just being a frustrated, terrible musician, I felt like I could, bring something to the table to help these people who were kind of fishing around looking for a sound. And I kind of said it out loud. And Chris had just developed his first bus mixer, the Dangerous 2 bus. Mm-hmm. And what he came up with was a Pro Tools rig, which I purchased. And he came up with a way to sum it in analog. And we built a rig that had a lot of analog gear available to insert on those channels. And I started doing that. So it was partially because I was trying to solve a problem that I was having a lot, and partially because I was a frustrated mixer. I mean, when I first got my job actually at Sony, when I was a kid, I wanted to be a rich and famous mixer like everybody else.
Yep.
I didn't even know what mastering was. I only discovered it when I was delivering tapes to the mastering guys. So that was my intention. And I was always the guy who had the drum machine in his mastering room and doing weird shit. So that didn't change when I went to Sterling. They actually enabled it quite a bit. I mean, I did, over the years after I got rolling at Sterling, I did all kinds of weird stuff. I mean, I recorded I finished recording, editing, and mixing a record with Erykah Badu. I've done vocal and guitar overdubs with the Neptunes and Meatloaf and lots of people. Microphones and recording, but even more mixing and programming stuff was always kind of my thing. And even though I was super busy doing mastering, I was such an obsessive that I wanted to do that other stuff too. So Chris built me this rig in a room, and we started doing stem stuff. And it came in very handy quite a few times. I mean, I actually mixed a bunch of things in my mastering room that I think even to this day still sound pretty good. But it was kind of split between doing some mixing stuff and doing some stem mixing. And of course now it's one of those things that's sort of overused, and it's sort of the bastard child of my early career. I don't like doing it. anymore. I'll do it when I have to. But at the time, it seemed like an innovation.
Yeah.
Now it seems like sacrilege, but
yeah,
you know,
I'm not a fan. I understand the virtue of it, and I see how what it can do, of course, in terms of flexibility and whatnot. But I still come back to the same old point, which is the purpose of engaging any mastering engineer is for someone to be that, objective third party, and you can only listen to a song for the first time once. And, I gotta be able to feel it like Johnny Punch Clock hears it. I gotta be able to get that impact. And even on a vocal instrumental, trying to, to automate I also think that these are producers' decisions. I don't want to be the one carrying the can to make these important decisions on the track as well. But again, I understand that. Look, again, if we look at mastering today, Chris, you remember back in the day, we had source, we had tape, we had a very kind of basic console and a lacquer with minimal processing, and now we're seeing a lot more processing between source and destination. So there's this evolution, if you will, of the art. But I don't know, is this part of evolution? Are we going to, again, I got no crystal ball. Maybe we may see a day where the majority of this work is people mixing and mastering. I don't know, but I still think that hopefully, in the same way there are still basket weavers on the planet doing hand basket weaving, there'll still be those specialist guys who you'll be able to call and consult, whether it's to get some feedback on your mix or to actually just master the record. And
the stem thing is pretty counterproductive, but there's the stem stuff I do now is at the client's request. It's never my idea.
Yeah,
I'll give, if I hear something I think is off or could be improved or might help the mix, I'll give notes and ask them if they want to do a recall. It's up to them. But almost 100%, I'd say 100% of the stem things I do now is because the client just asks me if I will. And I almost never say no. So I do still do it. It's not my favorite thing to do. It always takes way longer, and I don't want to be making those decisions. But, sometimes the trap of it is sometimes it comes out really good.
Yeah.
And you can do things that would not be possible without the stem. So, it gives and it takes away.
Yeah.
Mostly takes away.
Well, I'm very upfront with my clients, and I tell them, look, my mixing skills are as thus. I said, in my shower, I've got a Unimix tap. That's one control, and I struggle to get the temperature right of the water. That's how bad I'm at mixing. So, but I feel personally, Chris, when I'm dealing with clients who, again, I guess like in your world, the majority are rolling their own at home or doing their own thing. And I feel like if I can give them at least some kind of constructive, because for me, when I get often asked, is this good? And the subtext usually is, do you like me? Do you approve of me? Do you validate me? But I say, look, the only way I can say it's good for me is, can I listen to something and feel like, okay, can I work on this in my heart of hearts to a point where I feel I can give my client value for money? And that's a pretty clear line for me. That's not a kind of, and usually it's going to be very obvious things. Your kick is too loud, your vocal's too loud, there's too much simple. It's going to have to stand out like the proverbial dog's balls. But I feel that by giving that feedback to clients, particularly when they're working at home, it helps them get a better sense of their room. They learn how to compensate, helps them make better records, which then allows me to make a better record, to do my thing, which ironically is less. So I just don't want to interfere in that sort of thing. Now, if I was a proficient mix person, who knows? I'll never be able to answer that because I'm not. But I'm glad, though, that I'm able to say, look, I'm going to stick in my lane. This is what I'm good at. What I'm not good at, I'll just outsource to other people, or maybe I'll suggest, perhaps maybe you want to go see that guy or this guy or this girl who could probably help you more if you need someone to do a stem mix or something like that.
Yeah, it's always best. Again, that's not only do you look, like you have their best interests at heart, which you do, but it's best for you as well because it keeps things efficient, keeps you happy, keeps you in your kind of zone, if you will. I have very strong feelings about over listening to things, whether it's because there's too many options, like with a stem mix and stuff like that. That's another thing that I think about a lot. And one of the reasons I think why I'm fairly good at this is because I don't listen. Ironically, I think it's counterintuitive, but I'm very much a get it the first time I run it down kind of guy.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll make changes, but I don't obsessively listen to songs. I want it to be fresh. I want it to be a gut reaction.
Yeah.
And so I work very quickly, Yeah. Usually know what I want to do to a song by the second chorus.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah. I think after a while you get to that stage of being unconsciously competent, where, as you said, it's a gut instinctive feel. You know your room, you know your monitors, you get a vibe for the track, you know where the promised land is. When you hear something, you understand the vision and have that empathy with the client musically and artistically, and you just kind of know where to go. And I find myself, sometimes I have kids in there said, "Oh, what did you do?" or "What attack time?" I said, I don't know. There's no time metric here. It just says 1, 2, or 3, and I know where I put it at 2. It sounded good. Because I just happen to know. Again, if we look at it as a palette and these are different colors, a little red and a little blue makes this nice shade of green, and that shade of green is nice, and that's fine. I'm not going to second guess. I'm not going to argue with it. I'm not going to overanalyze it, because then it again defeats the purpose of what I do. If that's what I'm here to try and clear the fog and help things help things move along, so I can get to the next thing and get the next thing. This is, that's one of the things I love about mastering, Chris. Like you, I didn't know what mastering was. I mean, as a kid growing up, I'd always see names like, Bob Clearmountain all the time. I was a big fan of the American sound of during the 70s and early part of the 80s. And I think the only time I can remember seeing a mastering credit on a record was a Sammy Hagar album. And it was Wally Trudeau, rest in peace, at Capitol Records. That's the only time I remember seeing it in print. Hardly ever seen it. But I fell into mastering accidentally. And the first thing that impressed upon me was the speed of the process relative to sitting in a room and listening to a kick drum for 3 hours repeatedly. Whereas, the process was pretty quick. And if it meant I didn't particularly like that record at that moment, that's okay, because I'll probably like the next record. Or if I don't like, at some point, I'm going to like something. Thankfully, I've learned and cultivated an appreciation, I guess, like yourself, of a wide variety of music. So for me, I love the speed of the process and the fact that we get to turn things over and things are always fresh. And even if it's something that you don't particularly jive to, the next thing that comes along, you'll probably enjoy even more. So,
if you don't like the song, it's 3 or 4 minutes, you're good. Move on to the next thing that you probably will like.
Often I get asked, people say, "Oh, is there anything that you won't work on or anything that you don't like?" And as far as not working on things, the only things I won't work on are stuff that I know I can't deliver value on. And when it comes to subjective taste, even if it's something that I wouldn't buy with my own money or listen to in my own disposable time, I keep coming back to this, Chris, and I'm sure you have the same schooling. That is, I'm just grateful every day for the fact that I could, at my age, I can still sit here, twiddle knobs, and indulge in my passion. I have 2 passions, which is mastering and mentoring. But the fact that today, in this current market, I can still do that. I don't care if you're going to send me ballads or bloody Pentecostal Christian albums. Bring it. At least I get to do what I love to do. Because 90% of people out there right now in Austin or in Melbourne, at work, if they are at work, and they're looking at the clock waiting for 5 o'clock or punch, for lunchtime, and that's not my world, as I'm sure it is your world,
Here. We're the lucky ones, for sure.
So bring it, bring it all, so long as I can deliver, I don't care what it is. I'm not the arbiter of taste. I'm not here to judge you or your music. I'm here to make it sound as good as I can. And when people make a conscious decision now, Chris, in a time and place where people have so much choice and wonderful options available to them, and they decide they want you, whoever you may be, it's a privilege, man. It's an absolute privilege. Yeah. So,
what a great way to make a living.
Oh, well, absolutely. We're very fortunate indeed. So, buddy, I could talk to you for hours, and I try to make the podcast about an hour and a bit. We've kind of done a little bit overtime. But I would love to chat with you again because there's so much more that we could talk about. But
be a pleasure.
But Matt, again, what a privilege and an honor for me to be able to chat with you, and thank you for being also just online, man. It's wonderful. I'm sure that the older guys are out there probably don't get involved because they're busy, and I get that. But the fact that you're such a high-profile guy with your reputation, that you still get online, you still help, you're still humble enough to offer advice to people, and I think that's to be applauded and appreciated, man. I always get good value, not just from the information you put out there, but also from your humor, because you're a funny bloke. So I appreciate your wit as well. Chris Athens, thank you so much.
Thanks, Tony. Thanks for being patient with me, and it's great to actually talk to you in real time again.
Yeah, no, man. Well, I'm a firm believer in life. Life will bring you to where you need to come when you're ready for it. And I've always been patient and a long-term view, and it's been very satisfying and gratifying to have this conversation with you, Chris. Thank you again. Yeah,
let's make sure it's not another 2 years or 10 or whatever.
I'll see to that. All right. So I got to thank my sponsor, Amiga MMA and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in Collingwood. Thank you very much for their guys' support. 6 Down Street, Collingwood. Anyone who wants to come down, you can come and train with me. We're not a bunch of killers. Well, we are. We're bad motherfuckers. No, it's a wonderful, friendly place for those who want to come down, whether you want to just be fit and do a little something different, or you do want to train at a more advanced level. George Soteropoulos did very well in the UFC. He's a wonderful exponent of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, grappling, wrestling, kickboxing, and he's a great guy. He's a fantastic teacher, especially if you're new and you're a beginner. You really couldn't have better than George as your coach. So that's Amiga MMA, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu in Collingwood. So thank you very much to the team out there. Much appreciate their support of the podcast. Appreciate everyone else's support. So please, if you get to Mastering Music, Mastering Live, please give it a like. Please give it a share. And I'm looking forward to getting some more episodes out. So I'm out of here. As always, say please be nice to each other, but more importantly, be nice to yourselves. I love you, crazy kids. And we'll see you next time.